Now that we've been evoked and provoked by Lisa and Tay, I want to offer you a few of our thoughts from MDF about Maine's economy, where we are, where we're going, and how we think that even in these times, we can be optimistic and aspirational and ambitious about a bold new future for Maine and rebuild and build a vibrant economy that truly works for everyone, with everyone. In fact, we have no choice but to do so. Last year, I promised that someday winter would end and that the bloom of that new opportunity would emerge again. We had no idea at the time that the next COVID winter would turn out to be August and September. But nonetheless, we know that Maine is gradually rising back, but we're rising back into the midst of many of the challenges that have been with us all along. And how we meet those challenges will define the decades to come. We always recover eventually, and eventually is a key part of the problem. That dark, long line that runs out to the side of this slide was the jobless recovery, so-called, from December 2007, where it took us 9 years to come back in terms of jobs here in Maine. The latest forecast with the pandemic recession is 3 years, but that will certainly be affected by how long Delta lasts and what the next variant does to all of us and to our economy. So if we can indeed bounce back faster than we did during the prior Great Recession and face those strengths and those opportunities and challenges that we were facing in 2019 as we headed into this recession and seize those opportunities, that will be a good thing for our state. This has been an economic experience and a recession like no other, not surprisingly. And I'll just pick one example of that. Most of our economy has behaved the same way that big, long graph of all jobs has behaved. The hospitality sector, for instance, by August had gotten back many of its losses, but not all, and was creeping up towards the employment levels of prior year, but hadn't gotten there quite yet. But then we see this in the construction industry in the blue line, where in the middle of a recession, construction was booming, home sales were booming, building materials were at all-time record highs in price and futures markets. It's just been an interesting roller coaster that we never ever see in our economy. But fundamentally, we are growing back from the true depth of the recession right into the face of this. Labor force participation is lower than it's been in a long time. The number of people employed relative to our total population is lower than it's been in a long time. Some of this certainly represents the challenge still of COVID. It represents the safety fears of many of our especially older workers opting back into the workplace. It reflects the constraints on childcare and remote schooling that are still with us for many people in Maine. And it reflects the skills mismatch that many of our people still have. And so as we're coming out of the recession, some of those skills gaps have been magnified, not reduced. So there are many factors feeding into this. But this challenge, remember, we were facing this headwind of workforce in 2019. The challenges of the last 18 months have been truly distinct and truly severe. But now we're emerging right into the teeth of that same challenge with some slightly new dimensions and some even graver barriers to our Maine people. So what are we doing here at MDF, working with others, and what do we see as we work around the state that gives us faith in Maine's economy of today and tomorrow, that we can build back to where we want to be? So as we work across trusted research, as we work across leadership development, and as we work across partnerships and programs, what do we see? How can we move towards this goal? Not just a goal of jobs alone, not just a goal of economic growth alone, but a goal where economic prosperity, the health of our environment, and the vibrancy and richness of our communities all contribute to the true high quality of life for all Maine people. That is our vision at MDF, and is the vision of the Maine Economic Growth Council. We work with the Growth Council, a bipartisan, nonpartisan group on measures of growth, and that's a key cornerstone of all our work. So it can't be an MDF annual meeting without touching on what does the data tell us. And as always, we have to bear in mind that no matter how challenged we are as a state or as an economy, there are always gold stars. There are always important assets in which Maine shines. At the end of 2020, we identified 3 of those. Childcare is a huge challenge, don't get us wrong. But pre-K education, Maine is showing significant progress and outperforming most states on our preschool 4-year-old pre-K education. We have a lot of work to do on childcare for younger children. Safety. Our communities are among the safest in America by a wide margin. How do we continue to leverage that in trying to attract talent to want to stay here and to want to be here? And our environment, both air quality and water quality, off the charts still for Maine. How do we preserve that and yet not be satisfied, because these are our calling cards as a state. They're our calling cards for recreation, our calling cards for our way of life, and our calling card for a huge cross-section of our economy. And yet, the red flags, the gaps, they're persistent, they're significant, and a few of them that I want to touch on this morning. One is this: we have to have the combination of education, skills, innovative sectors in Maine's economy that can add value, because our wages cannot sustainably go up unless the value that we create together goes up. So if we want to create economic opportunity, we have to have a talented workforce working in innovative and high value-added sectors. And to that point, Maine continues to persistently lag, where the bottom line on this graph, persistently lag in the percentage of our economy that goes into research and development. And we need to continue to tackle this Achilles heel, or we can't create the opportunities that are in front of us. In some of the key sectors in Maine, we are making a renewed commitment to that R&D, and I'll touch on a couple of them. And finally, when it comes to the data, last year, for the first time in many, many years, the Growth Council included a new benchmark on addressing structural inequities in income by racial and ethnic group. And this number is stark: 38% gap between the average per capita income of Mainers of color and the average white Mainer. This is not much different than the nation. It's not much different than our region. And in fact, we've actually made some incredibly modest, but of course still deeply unsatisfactory strides towards moving this number slightly up over the past few years. So this is enormous. And the challenges that Lisa and Tay have laid out, not only how do we leverage the talent and the voice that lies within Maine people of every race, color, and cultural background, but how do we, when they're engaged in the economy, how do we make sure that there's true equity of opportunity in this economy? We've been pleased over the last 2 years to work so closely and collaboratively with the state of Maine, Governor Mills, Commissioner Johnson, and others on the notion that we needed to finally have, again, after decades, a long-range, 10-year economic strategy for this state. And 90 days later, COVID upended every assumption that we could have made. And yet, at the end, the core principles of that strategy are still sound. The core principles of that strategy informed the economic recovery work of last year, and we're now trying to connect the dots between that critical work and the American Recovery Act opportunities that are in front of us right now. So at MDF, we look at that data and we return to 4 core principles of our mission that are long-lasting. Invest in our people, invest in our communities, invest in innovative sectors, and invest in leadership. So while so much has changed, those imperatives for us remain the same. How we do them, the challenges we face in doing them, have evolved, but those core directions for us are the same. When it comes to investing in people, one of the critical things is to recognize, and I think this is implicit in a lot of Tay's talk as well, that the numbers are primarily in the people that are already in Maine's workforce or should be. It's important to work with our youth at every level to introduce them and prepare them for the opportunities of the future, but the hundreds of thousands of Mainers that are already in the workforce or of working age. That's where we have to move the needle the most, and Maine Spark and Maine Adult Promise, working with many partners, are seeking to do so and achieve this goal of 60% by 2025. The needs of adult learners are different. They're like the needs of every learner, except in many ways magnified, because the burden of running a household, raising children, working part-time or full-time, and trying to go back to school or upskill in the face of the aftermath of a pandemic, these are humans. These are people with obligations, and childcare, housing, transportation, and broadband were huge issues for us when we developed the 10-year strategy in 2019, and today they're exponentially bigger in terms of our economy and in terms of access to our economy. And the issue of inclusion and equity and systemic bias and systemic racism is huge in terms of how do we create opportunity for all learners to be part of closing the skills gap. And so our Navigator Network in Adult Promise has been doing a lot of work over the past 18 months on issues of implicit bias, equity, and racial justice, and we will continue to do that work with them so that they can truly grapple with what it takes to serve populations that may be different from themselves with cultural competency and effectiveness. What I have here reflects what Tay was talking about. Maine's population growth over the last decade, 2.6%. We say in the economic world, this sucks, because the nation was 7.4%. And behind this number was a 2.2% decline in the number of white Mainers, as Tay said. So to put it a little differently than Tay did, of all the population growth Maine enjoyed over the past decade, 177% of that population growth came from Mainers of color and Hispanic Latino Mainers. We are not birthing our way out of our demographic challenge or our population and workforce issues. Deaths are greater than births. We are dependent on many people to pick Maine as the place that they want to be, as the place that they want to contribute, as the place that they want to develop their careers and their businesses. And so I'm pleased to say that in 2016, I'm not surprised to see Tay Chung land at the State Chamber, because in 2016, we collaborated heavily with the Maine Community Foundation and the State Chamber of Commerce on the report that's on your screen about the important role of new Mainers and diversity in even having a fighting chance of cracking the code on Maine's workforce challenges. 5 years ago, in the middle of a heated national election on issues of immigration. And our point then and our point now is this is not a political issue. It's a straight-up economic imperative. Second, we have to invest in our people, but second, we have to invest in our communities, because people have to live somewhere, and our small businesses have to thrive somewhere. And this community fabric and infrastructure is crucial. We're privileged to work on those challenges through the Maine Downtown Center and the Main Street Maine program. You can see our partner communities all over the Maine map at every level of intensity of that Main Street model, a proven national model with a 25-to-1 return on investment. And the pandemic pushed every business, but every Main Street and every community to reimagine itself, to reinvent itself, to hang on, to survive. When you think about, the cash flow of a small business on Main Street in a retail or hospitality segment, when you think about the fact that still to this day, only a small fraction of Maine businesses leverage online sales as a truly significant portion of their business, we had to reimagine and support each other in so many ways that we hadn't had to do before. Partly we tried to do that through a common portal that the Main Street communities had previously launched, and I think became ever more important for driving recognition and traffic for the opportunities on Main Street. We were able for the first time last year to work with our Volunteer Maine counterparts to bring 5 AmeriCorps fellows out to the downtown center and to the communities we serve across Maine, and they were amazing. in terms of the vision and energy that these young leaders brought to the table that frankly put some of us established leaders, as we like to say, to shame in terms of what's truly possible. And we were so grateful just a week or two ago to be able to announce that we've received a second round of funding from the National Park Service, one of a very few in the country, to continue our work that we first received in 2019 for a second round of working on the bricks and mortar revitalization of key buildings in downtowns across Maine. And finally, the equity work hits home too. And we're so proud of the work that Heart of Biddeford has tackled to work with the Black-owned businesses in their own community, to work with Black-owned Maine. And this work is not easy, short-term, or simple. And I think as Delilah in Biddeford writes about this experience, what's the most important thing for the rest of us? The lessons learned. The lessons learned, certainly the hard way for her, the lessons a lot of us will have to learn the hard way of how do we work together and appreciate the sensibilities and the ownership and the voice that Black-owned business leaders need to have on Main Street and across Maine. And finally, when we talk about our communities, we have seen the housing markets of the last year exacerbate this challenge. How do we make sure that housing in Maine is contemporary and affordable for the broad spectrum of Mainers? And the red on this map, on these bars, shows you that in a majority of Maine counties, that housing is already out of reach for the prototypical resident in those areas of Maine. We're investing resources in this as a state. We're going to have to invest more. These issues of broadband, childcare, and housing will be the brake on our economic possibilities if we don't take them seriously and tackle them vigorously across Maine. Third, we have to invest in innovation, because if we have the right people and if we have vibrant and connected and inclusive communities, we still need to invest in the innovative opportunities of the future that can create value to replace markets that inevitably change and go away. And so I want to talk about 2 or 3 examples of that we're deeply engaged in with many others across Maine. And there are many other examples that we could speak to. But we've been engaged in the For Maine collaboration for 5 years now. It's hitting a new, I think, inflection point of the work to try to grow Maine's forest economy from $8 billion to $12 billion sustainably, and to add high-paying, sustainable jobs in rural Maine. And the key to that vision is to tie it to a vision around Maine's forest bioeconomy. Not a simple vision just of pulp and paper or solid wood products, but a broader vision of the entire scope of products that can come sustainably from the Maine woods and keep those Maine woods contributing to the environmental health of our state at the same time. The opportunities are enormous, and it boils down to this simple proposition, that everything that's made from fossil fuel today could be made from a tree tomorrow if we have the will and we close the gap between the research and the cost. And we're doing that across a lot of technologies. So whether it's reinvestment in Holton with Louisiana Pacific expanding a plant for their signature siding product there, or whether it's a biorefinery vision for the mill site in Lincoln, Maine, or whether it's an innovative use for round timber in Ashland, Maine, or whether it's large-scale industrial additive manufacturing, the fancy term for 3D printing, at University of Maine with partners across the country and across our state. The opportunities are huge. We are working right now with the stakeholders to put in a proposal for what they call a moonshot, the Build Back Better Regional Challenge from the Federal Economic Development Administration. It's not a literal moonshot. I don't want to challenge Habib's team to build a rocket out of wood and power it with wood, because they will do it. But it is a moonshot in terms of knitting together this tapestry of opportunity and going bold and going big for what we can create in the bioeconomy in Maine over the coming decades. A big part of that is how are we reaching both the workforce of today and the workforce of tomorrow? A question that was posed in the slide earlier was, how do we clearly and effectively connect K-8 with our long-term economic goals? And I think the shot on this slide conveys this sense that it's through real experiential learning, real service learning, the solution of real problems that affect Maine's signature industries of today and tomorrow. It's getting kids of all ages directly engaged in understanding and building skills as they help solve those problems. And finally, it's connecting our work with jobs and products and the bioeconomy with our efforts as a state on climate change and Maine's climate strategy. And this is my new favorite slide, so I want to spend a second explaining to you what it says. The bold blue line at the top is Maine's gross greenhouse gas emissions in millions of metric ton equivalents. The bold green line at the bottom is the amount of those greenhouse gases that are sequestered and sunk by Maine's working forest and by the products that we produce from those sustainable working forests. And they drag the big bold line down to that slightly less shaded line that starts to converge closer to zero. Bottom line, Maine's forests consume 70% of the greenhouse emissions that we're putting out as a state, and they can do more. Can we replace fossil fuels with natural wood fiber? Can we put more natural wood into building materials that sink a lot of that carbon for many decades to come? And can we continue to grow on the stump so that we can continue to sequester carbon every single day in our beautiful growing forests? Yes, 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 and yes. So I was going to submit to the $100 million X Prize for carbon sequestration technology this, our humble friend, the 2x4, or as we like to think about it, your portable carbon sequestration unit. So we're doing all this work in one of Maine's traditional industries, but in very non-traditional ways with very non-traditional objectives. And we are super pleased to be working with many stakeholders now to project manage the Sea Maine project, which is going to attempt to do the same for the living resource economy that comes from our sea and from our onshore aquaculture efforts here in Maine. And just like for Maine, the secret sauce to that effort is an enormous cast of collaborators that have to work together to make this happen. Work across innovation, workforce, and the connection to the real people and businesses that understand markets and that have to wake up every morning to try to meet what those markets want. Fourth and finally, we continue to invest in leadership. Many of you know MDF because of our programming and leadership. And after a year of amazing innovation and pivot by Jan Kearson team to offer you dozens of sessions in Lead Now that hundreds of Mainers were able to participate in, we are thrilled to be back with vaccinations, with rapid tests, and with every other precaution, and we hope it will be enough to keep Leadership Maine and the Institute for Civic Leadership on track this year. However, I think a natural question that I have in my mind and that you may have is, can we even still do this? In a time of polarization, politically, racially, and otherwise, can we still do this work? And can we still bring leaders together to lead collaboratively? I think when you look at some of the headlines of today or yesteryear, you might question that assumption. And indeed, on January 7th, one of my mentors called me up and said, and you may have seen me wearing the blue civility pin on my lapel of my jacket earlier, one of my mentors called me up and said, Yellow, you need to order 350 million more civility pins. And I love this old graphic from our friends at the Revive Civility Initiative, because that idea that maybe civility is going to flatline in our country is something that we all wonder, and I think we all grapple with, and we wonder, can we change it? And yet, I would say right in front of us in Maine, and we hope in D.C., our elected officials and those who work with them continue to prove that it is possible. The compromise that fueled Maine's new bipartisan budget deal. Whoever expected we'd see the word compromise and bipartisanship again? And we hope that we can get final passage, but we certainly are impressed that in D.C. too, they're able to come together around a bipartisan infrastructure bill. So I think we all have to look around and find ways to convince ourselves that this work is possible, This work is being done, but this work is hard. And so that's one of the reasons we persist in our work with Policy Leaders Academy to help the Maine legislature engage in data-driven, geographically diverse, issue diverse, and now racially diverse understanding of what an equitable economy means. And we will keep doing that for them as long as they'll have us. So maybe it's just me, but actually when I look at these arrows, I don't see two arrows that are driving towards a confrontation or a clash. I actually see two arrows that might be driving towards a meeting up, that might be driving towards a place for dialogue, that might be driving towards a place to build consensus. That's the way we do our work, and we will keep doing it because we think more than ever that's what we need, and we have to prove together that it's possible. We can only do it on political issues or deeper issues in our society if we rise to the challenge that Lisa laid out for us earlier, that we do it in true relationship, that we do it in true connection with each other, with the land, and with our history. At MDF, we're doing our own modest part in that work, and it's suffused throughout everything we're going to do and has to be. We are humble about it. We are learning. We know it will be hard work, and we know we will make mistakes as we start where we are and we attempt to grow. I would say in a bigger sense than all of the work of MDF and our work together to forge an equitable and growing and prosperous Maine economy, it's a moonshot every day. And what we need to do is find the hidden figures that lie behind that moonshot as well and make sure they're brought to the fore. So we will not give up daring greatly. We will not give up risking failure. We will not give up carrying a standard for investment. Investment in people, investment in community, investment in innovation, and investment in leadership. We at MDF know this work is still possible and that it's impossible for us to fail working together. Thank you so much for being part of this work.